7th at 10:30. And I've invited anybody that is here to sign in. Does anyone else need an agenda? And I will note that the agenda was published on the town's website, as are the minutes that we're going to be discussing. If we can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Maybe we can close that if that's okay. Thank you.
Much better.
So we have had everybody sign in to a roll call of the members. We do have a quorum present. There is no public attendance at this time, but I will note that if the public at any time wishes to comment and you are virtual, if you can just let somebody know by a motion on the screen, and we will do our best to make sure that everybody is heard. I also want to note that the marketing meeting is meeting on September 10th at 5:30. It is, as would be for all committees, their agenda and their notice is on the town's website, and anyone that wishes to attend, we would encourage you to do so, since there will be some interrelationship between our committee and the marketing meeting. Additionally, at this point, the adoption of the agenda that was circulated, I want to make sure everybody has seen it. It was posted on the town's website. Does anybody have any comments about the agenda for today's meeting? Is there a motion?
I motion to approve the agenda.
And any second? Anybody in agreement? Please voice your position with adopting the agenda.
I agree to adopt the agenda.
Any objections? So the agenda is now adopted. I also had circulated the minutes from the July 13th meeting. Has everybody seen that?
Yeah.
And does anybody have any comments about it? Can I hear a motion with respect to those minutes, please?
A motion to approve the minutes from July.
Is there a second? And all in favor?
All in favor, aye.
Any objections? So those minutes are adopted as the formal minutes from that meeting. I would also remind everybody that there is a recording of all of these meetings, so for the public's information, anybody that is interested in hearing the proceedings can check at any time of their convenience. So I want to move on to discussion items. Good morning.
Good morning, I'm sorry, I just didn't hear what you said.
May we continue or settle in?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to turn to the information that I circulated. It was requested at our last meeting regarding the Coastal Conference in Dover that Dave Thomas and I attended. It was attached to the minutes and it had been discussed during our last meeting. Does anyone want to talk about what that information contained or any questions about it? No? Very good. I also wanted to then turn to the long-range planning on education, information, and research. It was a subcommittee with Kelly Baxter, Leah McDermott, and Dave Thomas. Is somebody from that committee, can they discuss what they have done since our last meeting?
Sure. You know, Liam and Dave and I both, the three of us went individually out and started to look up some information, and I think the biggest thing that we took away is that there's a lot of information and we need to understand more as a community where we want to head with this. And then speaking with other subcommittees, I realize there's a lot of overlap. And where we put that as a committee, we need direction from the larger group to understand where we put this in priority. It's an expensive undertaking. Dave has gone and looked at surrounding communities, and we realize how much they're spending. We want to make sure we're part of that process with other communities. And I think, the biggest action item we learned that we would recommend is having a liaison of some sort that is consistent in reaching out to these other communities. And I don't know what that looks like in terms of someone who's a staff member, or whether it's someone on part of this committee, but someone who's consistently in touch with the other communities. We've learned that Lewis is much further along in this, Fenwick Island is much further along in this process. They've spent a lot of money looking at next steps, and they're in process. Dave, you just went to that meeting, right? And
Yeah, it was the second annual Fenwick Island Bayside Flooding and Resiliency Information and Discussion on Friday, August the 30th for an hour and a half, and then people lingered. I left at 5:15 and people were largely still there. It is a Zoom meeting, so you can go and see what it was. The highlights were where we left off last August, what's happening now, next steps, question and answer, hosted by the Fenwick Island Infrastructure Committee. I was interested to see that they also have a flood and storm committee and a resiliency committee as separate committees. And they were all there. I guess there were about 30 people in person. I was interested to see that they had a pamphlet just from the recent, from the Sea Grant and the Association of Coastal Towns, and the University of Delaware and NOAA. The University of Delaware had prepared their brick grant of a substantial character, and they're awaiting the result of that. And then they had the ACT roster, and they had a number of other materials as to where they were in their planning process and the like. The last thing that I found interesting was a recent pamphlet that they had there from the Center for Inland Bays, Protecting the Inland Bays, a Waterfront Property Owner's Guide. Yeah.
so I feel like what we do know is they are in wait of a $400,000 grant.
Yeah, and they have, that was interesting to hear about. I want to say one thing. They believe that Lewis is ahead of the pack in terms of the coastal towns, and that they are somewhat trying to catch up. But the level of engagement and the idea that you would have this annual event, so I was enthusiastic to see that maybe we could piggyback something onto Earth Day in terms of marketing.
Well, and we don't want to touch on marketing because that's the marketing committee, although there will be some coordination with it. But I did want you to finish with, you were explaining about the $400,000 grant.
That is, they're waiting to know if that's going to go through. And it was just a learning moment for me to understand that people are in front of us with this, and how do we piggyback?
Yeah.
And
It
how
was
do
the University of Delaware that prepared the BRIC grant.
yeah, and so I guess just back to the larger committee, and Liam did some work looking down at Virginia Beach, and we just realized these are such massive amounts of money and commitment, and how do we fit into the process? How do we learn from them, but also be a part of it going forward? And, I'm not sure whose role that should be, and it obviously jives with infrastructure, resilience fund. So, in the timeline of what we're trying to do, we need to figure out where long-term planning comes and where that funding jives with what we're also trying to do elsewhere.
So I think part of this committee is to make recommendations in that regard, and it can be kind of overwhelming. And I know Dave Davis, who led this committee last year, worked very hard in trying to narrow the scope. With that in mind, is there some direction or something that we can do as a committee to narrow how we approach this? I know you said a liaison from this committee, so that's.
Well, I don't even know if it should be from this committee, but a liaison, maybe it should be someone from the larger commission, or maybe it should be someone from here, but someone so we're not duplicating conversations, so we know who to contact, so someone's, the same person is reaching out consistently and being part of these other conversations.
Gary, is there anybody that is appointed by the town to serve in that capacity, or how would you suggest we approach that?
There's no one specifically appointed. The building official, Don Hinks, gets involved in some of these activities with other municipalities, but there's no individual who's tasked with the kind of charge that you're suggesting here. And could I ask a question also, sort of a comment? What's a little difficult for me is to understand exactly why you believe we're behind. What have those, having a public information thing is good, and pulling in things from the Center for Inland Bays and the Sea Grant program. Well, those are all good things, and this committee probably should be engaged with those groups as well. But I just like, we're working on a resiliency fund, just for example. That's been Dave Davis's focus. Who actually has one? And how is it set up? We're talking about a storm reconstruction ordinance. Who actually has one? We're working to try to develop one, but, so can we better characterize exactly how you feel we're behind?
Well, and maybe that's just me.
And I don't mean that necessarily
Maybe my
right now.
knowledge is behind.
Yeah.
But I will say that part of the things we discussed was defining the difference between resiliency fund and long-term planning. Like, maybe it's one and the same, or part of the same timeline in terms of planning. So we were looking at big, major, if they're gonna put floodgates underneath the Indian River bridge, things like that I don't feel like, or are they gonna raise Route 1 18 inches? Some of those, 2050 projections, I don't know what kind of conversation we've had in the past.
Right, do we know what their 400,000 grant is? When you apply to a grant, you have to have an outline of what you expect to use the funds for and whatnot, so do they have
I
that?
haven't read the grant itself, but I read articles about the grant.
Right.
And she had circulated an article that is from the Dispatch that was from January 11th of this year. I will be happy to copy it and circulate it, but I'll quote from it. It says $400,000 grant for a micro-level engineering study that will focus on Bayside flood mitigation. So that's the
Sounds pretty
summary.
broad.
Yeah.
Is that a federal grant?
It was a combination, right?
Brick is involved. There's a further write-up in last week's Coastal Point that spells it out.
Remind me what BRIC stands for, because I don't remember.
I'm sorry?
Remind me what BRIC stands for, I don't remember.
Oh, Building Resilient Infrastructure Communities. And that was one of the two core things that was at the Rascal Summit in 2022. I did want to say one thing in reference to what you had said, Gary. I found going to Fenwick Island a good learning experience for me. It's to the point that, to borrow from the late Groucho Marx, from You Bet Your Life, and the secret void. I have a secret void for today's meeting that was an outgrowth of that.
So, Gary, what would you suggest we do to get this liaison? Should it come from this committee? Should it be something the town does? Should it be something that our committee recommends among the types of things that we are working on, that be one of the items that we notify the town is something we believe should occur?
Well, you're expressing a general need for more information about what's going on in our communities. And so we ought to be able to, we can kick that around at the town council level and see what people think about is the best way about getting that kind of information. Some of it would come back to ACT, which we're part of. And as I said before, some of it would come back to our building officials. The town manager is certainly out there involved in the communities as well. So we need to find some way of marshaling those different resources and have a central collection point so it can be fed in this community. So we'll
Yeah.
take that as
Well, and,
recommendations to the town council.
I mean, that was our biggest, and Liam, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, sorry, I could not really hear what Gary just said, but I think what we're trying to understand is like what exactly our focus should be as a subcommittee. If we should focus more on funding, or if we should focus more, because I know there is a resiliency fund, or if we should focus more on getting like the exact recommendation down, because I feel like there are multiple paths we could go. And plus there's already that Route 1 study going on, so how our recommendation would overlap with that. There's more work to be done, but I think our question is, what exactly is our scope? And are any of the other committees, like the infrastructure committee, going to be involved, and how so?
Yeah, I think we all came away thinking this is so broad and there's so much information and good information, but what is our directive from the larger commission? And in terms of the Route 1 study, what we also discussed was if they're going to be making major decisions like that, we want to be a part of it, because they're not going to care about the Dewey like we're going to care about Dewey. And if they're going to make major suggestions about changing Route 1, we should be a part of that conversation. And we want to avoid overlap. We want to learn from what other communities have done, and we need some consistency in this conversation was basically our biggest takeaway.
May I ask if it's possible, and if it would be helpful, were we to invite the people that you indicated, Gary, were taking bits and pieces and kind of doing the work perhaps, but without a single entity with all of the knowledge, if they were to come and speak on this so that we had a better understanding? And then if
You
you,
talk about the building official, town manager, and et cetera?
yes.
Okay.
And it's so that we, and I think this was an issue at the last committee as well, last season, was where do we take the information? How do we narrow it? How do we not duplicate it? And so I'm hearing that one of the things is to have perhaps a liaison, that if that person doesn't already exist, and that's something that you've indicated you can bring back to the council and let us perhaps know at the next meeting.
Sure.
And then maybe for our next meeting, if it doesn't work with everybody, then maybe the time after, we could try to have each of them on the same day come and speak, so that we have a better sense of what information each has in terms of just trying to find a way to compile it, not duplicate it. Does that sound like
I
something
mean,
that
and
would
maybe
be
some of
workable?
those conversations can happen in advance, before, so we don't get bogged down in a meeting setting. Have that conversation and then report back.
May I suggest, if you would be so
I
kind,
mean, if
as
I-
to be in contact And then if it's determined that we need them to come and speak further, I will put it into next time's agenda. And otherwise, I'll have the two of you report back. Would that be okay?
That's fine, yeah.
Okay. So we'll put that on next time's agenda. Thank
And
you.
I'll be in touch with my son.
I appreciate that.
So just so I'm understanding this, are we asking for a compiled list of possible people and committees and towns, contacts to reach out to? Is that what we're asking for?
So not quite. It may be ongoing, as I hear Gary say, but with a variety of these people doing different parts of it. And so,
That's what I mean, like, I think it would be nice to have a compiled list of, okay, Fenwick Island, here's
Well,
the.
and what I'm asking for is a step before that, which is who amongst us,
Just within Dewey.
yeah, within Dewey, is gonna be the person to take that next step, which
And-
is compile that list and speak with those people
and so Gary's going to look into,
I'm afraid they're gonna look at me and say, oh, it's you here.
Yeah, Gary is here. I approve.
we can take a vote on that.
I'm gonna join you up there. just for a
Please
while,
do.
just so,
Thank you.
Well,
coming up to the mic.
I honestly think it'd be really nice if we had like a shareable Google Doc where we all had access to it and, you know, we all do our due diligence, like somebody reach out to Fenwick Island and see like, who's the contacts over
and.
there? What
Right,
do you
I mean,
know?
I didn't feel, like, as an example,
It's
a practical-
overwhelming for two.
Right, and I don't wanna call
electors.
Fenwick Island if someone else from Dewey's already called them.
Right.
You know, like,
Right.
we just need to organize these, we need to develop a process to communicate with.
So I can tell you that last time, based on going to the Dover meeting, I started doing that. Who's the town manager? Who's
Right.
And it all turned over, so there's new people.
Right.
But I think that step one is for Gary to look in to see who's there, for you to be consulting with these people, and see if it already exists, and maybe then through your subcommittee, you can compile that list. If it's already available, if it's not, it may be your next mission statement.
Well, and ultimately, get information from those communities, but also have a voice within that coastal, you
And
know.
perhaps have, as part of this, knowing when they regularly host meetings on this, who our contact people are, things of that sort. But I think step one is to figure out what each of the people that Gary has listed has as far as knowledge. For Gary to look into getting a liaison, how that would be and if not, then we look into whether our committee will need to perhaps have someone. Okay? Does
If I
that-
may I make
Please.
a quick comment?
Absolutely.
I think in addition to finding someone to act as that coordination point, there was I emailed back and forth with Bill Stevens, our mayor, who's also the head of ACT, and he shared some information that ACT had collected about this time last year, I think it was September 2023, about each town who's a member of ACT and their current activities. Now, certainly some progress has been made on each of those town fronts, but I think that's a good thing for each of us to read and understand more. I think I forwarded that to you, Deborah. If I didn't, let me know. So we can share that with the group and creating a repository or some sort of place where we can start to house all this information is a good idea. I think once we get a coordination point or a person who's, you know, the central person who's responsible for understanding and participating with these organizations, I think we'll have a clearer sense of how to proceed in the big picture, because it is a very complex problem that requires, you know, some very careful planning and work just to, you know, get from here into, you know, productive work projects, right? So.
Thanks, Dave. So what would you like us to do with what you've shared?
Well, you know, to share it with the rest of the team members here, the committee members, and so they can read up on at least, you know, the status of every town in ACT's efforts on this part as of last year. And I think that will help us understand more about specifics. It sounds like we know something in detail about Lewis and Fenwick, but the other towns are mentioned there as well. All the members of ACT are reporting their progress. I'll check with Bill and see if there's been any further communication on that front. ACT had been trying to coordinate that information gathering, and I don't know if it's continued or it just kind of stayed where it was as of last fall.
I thought you had circulated that already.
I'm sorry?
I thought that Deborah had circulated that survey.
That's where.
That was from 2023.
Yeah.
I'm not clear on when. Was that in September?
Yeah, it was last fall. It was about this time last year.
Is that the ACT Climate Change Resiliency Survey Answers 2023?
That sounds like it.
Okay, I do have copies of all of that, if anybody would like to have that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got it on my laptop here somewhere.
So that may be helpful. I do think that was circulated by email, and it also got posted on the town's site, but it's important that we do reference that. So with respect to item under Roman numeral 4B, is there additional comment or discussion that we want to have today, or do we wait for that additional information and come back to this next session?
Well, one sort of thing I could say as a target for before next meeting is to maybe have specific people from our town that communicate, that have touch points in the other towns, that we have names and phone numbers. Maybe that's a goal. Understand their structure and who we should communicate with is a first step.
So I think that when Gary speaks to the people he's delineated,
Yes.
along with some of the other information that has been shared, that we may have a lot of
Yes, and if
that.
Gary could share that with me,
And
and then we can.
Sure.
And if we don't, then if you
Then
don't
we work
mind
on
my
it.
dumping on
Yeah.
you again, if you could figure out what it is we're missing, and if you're able to
Yeah,
get that
I'll look at some other
information.
towns' sort of hierarchy structure, and if Gary probably has that.
We also have to remember that there's turnover, so,
Right, maybe the role or
right.
title, yeah.
It would be helpful perhaps to have the role and then the current person. Or if you learn that if the person is
Yeah,
getting ready
'cause
to
I'm not
change
sure
over.
how else to move forward, and I don't want to duplicate or override someone who's already started that conversation.
Maybe an easier way to collect that information than doing it, from the ground up is, I'm going to talk to Bill Stevens anyway to see if there's any further information that's been provided through ACT. Maybe I can ask Bill to bring up to the ACT members who are their town representatives or coordinators for resilience and so forth.
Well,
That's a great idea.
and maybe one of the answers is, we're doing it. We already have that. So I just don't want to, miss or
So,
go over some of these.
And I'd like to also throw out that if and when we find these contacts, that each of us become a liaison with those communities, so it's not all you guys doing as the subcommittee.
Yeah,
That would
That's a
avoid
lot.
duplication, certainly.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as, right, it's just about having strong lines of communication and being
Right.
part of the process.
so,
Learning and also contributing our 2 cents about who we are and what we need from these long-range plans.
so Dave, I'm hearing you're going to speak with the mayor, you're gonna get back to Kelly and discuss if the information exists, you can share it. If it doesn't exist or it only exists partially, then she'll know what her next marching
Yeah.
orders are.
Tell me what to do.
Is that about right?
Perfect. Yep.
Excellent. Kelly, did you want to share anything else?
No, that was, we just came away overwhelmed.
Understandable. And Liam, how about you? Did you have something else you wanted to share?
No, I think this is a good start for us.
And Dave, did you have anything else on the?
Yeah, I'm confused. You mentioned people that Gary had delineated?
Well, he mentioned them by
I just mentioned
titles.
the town manager, the building official, just the ACT group in general, those are the things, 3 people or groups, I believe, that I mentioned.
Yeah, okay, I won't, that was
Yeah.
fuzzy to me. The information that I have is that after Bill Stevens was the president last year, it was Rosemary Hardiman down in Bethany Beach who was the president for her year. She, however, has withdrawn from running for mayor again. So I don't know when ACT's year is. I get the impression it's in January. So I guess there's somebody down in Bethany. They're having their election on the 10th. And then next year there will be someone else new. It would be helpful to know what ACT's charter says. And I haven't been able to find a website for them.
I think it's a little less formally organized, Dave, and I did mention, or Bill mentioned that, so there may be some issues in terms of coordination there, but let me follow up and get some information. We'll pass it along.
I appreciate it, Dave. If you could also find out when ACT's year end is, when their new heads are elected, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I would think that would be in the charter document, which would be very helpful to understand.
What does ACT stand for?
Association of Coastal Towns.
Okay.
Anything else on that item? Okay, so we're going to move on to action item under Roman numeral 5A, and that is for Dave Davis and Sally Silver to share with us about the information that was disseminated to property owners and public education campaign that you all were going to discuss.
Okay.
Blank looks.
So we kind of came up with, and this, we're really thinking in terms of the next 6 months to a year in terms of public education. And we kind of organized the information we feel that we should be talking to the marketing committee about. So this is all in terms of what we want to communicate to the marketing committee. In terms of what information should be disseminated throughout the community. So we came up with 4 fairly broad areas, one of which is an introduction, which I think, and I think we all agreed, is fairly important. It will basically say who we are, why we're doing this. You know, we're here to protect the town and ensure that future generations get to enjoy the town as much as we have, and let them know that we are going to be working on public education, making sure everybody has access to the information that they need. A second area is the dissemination of information on what we're doing, why we're doing it. A third kind of broad area is what's in it for me, which is going to be, that's going to be a good one, because there are a number of stakeholders. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice this morning. There are different stakeholders and different, people are going to have different ideas, especially if you get into the area of real estate disclosures and, so we need to figure out how we're going to handle all of that and disseminate information in a way that helps to build consensus and gets the community on board with what we're doing. And lastly, we talked about what's the best vehicle for disseminating information. I mean, ultimately, this is in the purview of the marketing committee, but You know, we're just going to throw out some ideas in terms of how we think we could best convey the information, and via a number of different vehicles, including, you know, maybe around Earth Day, Dewey Beach Preservation Day, something that would allow people to come in, talk with various individuals that would be able to answer questions, provide them with materials, and who knows, I mean, you could even make it a fun day for people and have activities for them. But just to go back, so those are the broad areas, and there's more detail in each of those areas that we are including for the marketing committee. So the introduction is fairly straightforward. Disseminating information, you know, the key areas I think we're talking about are we're disseminating information on what we're doing and why we're doing it, such as, you know, free board increase recommendations, establishment of a town resiliency fund, storm reconstruction ordinance measures, identification of flood risk, and consulting with other coastal towns in ways that will behoove us with regard to long-range planning, and joining forces with them, either to learn or to secure funding. And the what's in it for me, as I said, I think that's we're gonna have to work a little more on that, because I think it's gonna take a little more thought in identifying the stakeholders and how to best approach that. And then identifying the best vehicle for information. You know, we could do a lot via email, we could do a lot via printed material. We don't want to drown people in information. So, you know, it's possible that what we disseminate via email is broad brush strokes with information about where, if people want to drill down in any particular area, where they can, you know, where they can identify, where they can go to get additional information. So, I mean, that was basically what we came up with in terms of our thoughts for engaging the marketing committee and understanding that they're going to do their thing their way, but just letting them know what we think the areas that should be addressed.
So first off, thank you for the work you all did. There was a 2-page outline that I did circulate and got put on the town's website, which goes into a lot of the detail that has just been shared. There had been discussion about our committee meeting with the marketing committee. It was worked on in terms of scheduling it. It appears that it would be better for our committee to more focus on how we want to approach the marketing committee before that is scheduled. Their next meeting is September 10th, and it would be extremely helpful if somebody could attend that, perhaps be in touch with the head of that committee. Dave, I think you've been talking to the head of that committee, is that right?
I haven't spoken to Alex, who's the chair of the committee, but I have through Paul Bauer, who's the liaison from town council. And so I can probably do something to participate remotely, but I wouldn't be able to be there in person.
I would just want to emphasize that we take the information that we deem important and let the marketing committee do their work. You know, like I want to be supportive of what they're already doing.
Absolutely.
So I just want to say that overarchingly, that I think our goal should always be to give them the things we think are important and let them, within the broader context, disseminate, do their job.
Absolutely, and of course, you had made a suggestion of a Dewey Day or something of that sort. I'm sure the marketing committee is always anxious to have any kind of new ideas, but they are the ones that are going to be publishing everything and circulating it in a way that they believe is the best way to educate the public. What we need to do is get the information together that we want them to publish in the way that they choose
Which I
is
think this does
best to
well.
do. So it would be helpful to have somebody attend that meeting and just to bring back to our committee what they are doing. Perhaps that would help us to get our information in a form that we can share it with them to do what they are more specialized in doing. Is that
Yeah.
fair to
I'll
say?
plan to attend.
That would be excellent.
One quick note about that. I think, the marketing committee is chartered to do these kinds of things, but a lot of what they do is very event-driven and specific. Here, we're talking about what could be, an over a period of time, a full campaign with multiple rounds of information sharing. So this one might need to, a lot closer coordination than typically we tell them, here's some information, please put it out. This is a longer term play here, I think we need to develop.
Would it be advantageous for perhaps you to reach out to Alex and see if maybe you can chat with him a few minutes before the meeting, assuring him that we're not trying to invade his committee, but we want to figure out the best way to get information for his committee to do what they're good at doing. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. I don't have
Excellent.
any problem doing that. And I think what Dave just said is kind of the point here, and it's why, we kind of went into the detail that we're going into. This is a long-term prospect. We're talking about, this, what we have here is really what we're looking to accomplish in the short term. But this could go on for years. So maybe the approach needs to be different, and that, of course, that's up to them to decide. But again, coordination with them and, providing whatever support we can so that they can do.
Do we need to recommend that the draft document be shared with them if Sally and I, if during the meeting it becomes clear that they're looking for more specific direction than just a discussion to be had? Can the committee at this point recommend that we share this written document with them, or should we hold back on that, do you think?
You're reading my mind. That's exactly where I was heading, is that everybody should now have received both by email, posted on the town, and then I just circulated it, the document that has been prepared. And with that in mind, I would open for discussion as to whether we want to share this exact document with them, and if so, I will welcome a motion on that. Is there further discussion that anybody wants to share?
I would just note that it's already it's posted on the town website for today's meeting, so it's already a matter of public information.
Well, one of the
So
things
I
that
would just take that into account.
One of
when
the
we
things that we
decision.
discussed was, having our own tab or whatever, because I know the information's there and I spent a long time searching for things. But having one location, both virtually or maybe in a, filing cabinet here, that is specific to what we're talking about. Bringing those documents into one virtual space that
That would be helpful.
right, even though they exist elsewhere, but making sure we have them as a group, as resources for ourselves, but also new homeowners, with a place to direct people that's a little simpler, that we edit, that we recommend.
So, with respect to that, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is everything's being done electronically, so paper documents are probably not going to be that welcome. And everything is published on the website. I am unclear whether it's all under the committee's website when this information goes out, or if it's broad spectrum. Do you know?
You mean meeting materials, like?
So all of the things that are going out there, is it just one major document production, or is it limited when we circulate documents? Is it strictly under our committee, which I think,
It's on the town website under meetings. So, I mean, all of the meetings for each, whether it's town council or any committee, the agendas are there and all of the materials are associated, and Kate's pulling it up now. So, again, it's out there, it's available. If the marketing group wanted to look at, the agenda and the materials for this meeting, anyone can do that. It's very easy to find.
I have a question on that. I see where the attachments to today's meeting are listed there.
Right.
Come Monday, will they disappear, or we're not going to use a Dropbox, but where is the library
Well, to your
where we
point,
can track our own thinking that's been committed to
Like where all the tabs
writing.
are,
so
could we
it's
have our
all,
own tab?
it's all there. It
Just
just,
finding it.
actually, it's not all there. So in today's meeting, we have links for what's going on in this meeting, but then when you go back to the climate change and you go into the minutes in 2004, we just have an April 13th, 2024 PDF. So it needs to be, like whatever's on today's meeting with all the documents need to be put into the committee documents under climate change.
I agree. We don't have anything since 2022, really.
Right. Because that's where I was going and I'm like, I can't find it.
Yeah,
So
well,
what
I found it difficult,
It's available if you look at the calendar. Once the meeting is over today, that meeting information will disappear.
Yes,
If you
and
go to the- if you go to the
that to
monthly
me
calendar,
is a problem.
There's a link in the monthly calendar where you can get all of the same information, but it's
Can we-
not
can we-
immediately obvious.
Can we control that? Can we as a committee, or do we have to work with the town?
it has to be worked
Well,
through the
you work
town.
with the town, yeah.
But what I'm also hearing is that while it certainly impacts this committee and the education in general, it is
Right.
probably not an action item for this committee, but it may be something that perhaps the town can address in a better way of sharing
I
that.
think the individual who.
Sorry,
That's okay. He's the one that's on top of all of the organization at the
I
website.
want to make sure I understand crystal clear. Gary, are you saying that with respect to the attachments to today's meeting,
Right.
they will disappear on Monday, yet there is a methodology or a link where you are able to look them up
In the monthly calendar, yes.
in the monthly calendar?
If you know the date.
If you know that, that's
If
true.
you
I
know
said
the
it's
date.
not immediately obvious to anyone, but it is there.
And how do you get to the monthly calendar?
It's, there's a link, if you look at the end of the list of meetings, Kate can show you, there's a link to the calendar.
If you go to more meetings,
Oh, okay.
then you
More
can
meetings,
kind
yeah.
of pan
Yeah, this
through.
is where I
Okay,
got
that's
bogged
even
down.
better.
So
Yeah, that's where I
this
was like,
seems like a
If we can't find our own
website
material.
issue and not an issue for our committee. And it does sound like something that maybe should be discussed with the town, probably outside of our scope, but certainly an action item that would be beneficial to the public if the overall website were a little bit more user-friendly.
But,
That's what I'm hearing.
is it true that once the meeting is over, once you have approved the minutes for a meeting, you actually are creating a PDF that has the agenda, the minutes,
Yes.
and all of the associated materials, so.
So
and
there
that's-
is a
that's on the
meeting
committee
packet
website.
that you can look up historically.
So any of the supporting documentation that I post along with a meeting, at your next meeting, when you approve the minutes from everything that was done today, I create a packet. It includes your minutes, the agenda from today, all the supporting documents, and that goes into the meeting minutes archive. Again, we're always going to be a month behind or more because we need to approve that before it gets posted.
Right.
If it's helpful, under your committee documents, if you look up here on the left-hand side, I can start dumping those supporting documents in there earlier, if that's what you want. That's very easy. It's click it, drop it, and there it is.
We would love that.
For me,
You
this
got
is an epiphany.
Thank you.
So we need to educate ourselves as a committee and then we educate the public.
The only other thing I wanted to add is that I saw on, in various places that communities have a timeline, and I found that really helpful. You know, they had long-range and short-term projects, and, and it literally was just a visual timeline. And I think it helped me understand the difference between a resiliency fund and a long-range plan and a infrastructure. So I don't know if we could, I would say that to the marketing committee like that. I found that to be a helpful visual aid, and I can imagine that being useful in communicating to the public.
When we met with Kelly and Sally and myself a couple of times, and the document that we talked about a little bit ago about sharing with marketing, in the last section of that, the third bullet actually talks about this, creating a web page or a central place where all the climate related documents and things are kept. And, that was actually, I think, Kelly's recommendation, and the timeline and so forth could be included in that. So it is a carry forward kind of thing that we can do and maybe improve a little bit upon. We organize and keep the documents now.
So I would like to hear from everybody if there's any opposition, since this has already been posted, that this document that's been circulated be shared when you meet with Alex of the marketing committee, and so that, and maybe bring a couple copies so that he has it, he can give it to his other members to start the discussion and make sure that he understands this is, we're trying to give them information, we're not trying to invade what they're doing or to duplicate it, but to figure out the best way of working with him. Is there any further discussion on sharing this with Alex?
I have a question. My copy has 3 points of commentary,
I don't think those are supposed to be there at all.
but
It's
I
just the
don't
way they're
know
printed.
what that commentary
I don't
has
think
been
It
or
was a
would
working
be.
document.
It was,
Yeah.
it's just the way
It was
they're
a
printed.
working document.
So I wouldn't worry about it. So it's just the darker amounts, the stuff on the right was their working efforts towards creating this very thorough document. Is there any objection to them sharing and discussing this with Alex? Does everybody vote to approve that that occurs?
I'm not clear on what the downside would be to withholding it, or what the upside would be to withholding it.
It's a benefit to give a talking point, to start discussions and figuring out how to best coordinate with the marketing committee so they understand where we are coming from in some more organized fashion.
My thought is, if this in fact reflects their thinking, they ought to know it.
Well, it's already out there, it's just a question of us
Yeah.
giving.
No, I think we are clear that we're open to push back our discussion from them if they,
Exactly, so that they understand we're not trying to duplicate or invent.
right.
And that should be relatively easy to handle via a conversation before the
Excellent.
meeting. And,
Yeah.
So
you know,
all
we're
in
just kind of
favor,
brainstorming here.
Right.
all in favor of sharing the document directly on Tuesday, I think that is.
Just one other point. If the committee members all end up with a copy of the document and it's discussed at the meeting, it has to be available to the public as well. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, Kate, I believe that's,
Yeah, so their agenda was already posted. This is not on their agenda.
I understand.
So certainly if someone wants to come in and essentially just make a comment that, hey, this is going to be coming down the pipe, we've prepared this document to share with all of you to hear at your next meeting, can certainly do that. We just couldn't have an in-depth discussion regarding this at their meeting next week.
And so and I apologize if I overstated, I meant for you to hand it to Alex, for him to share with committee members at the time that he believes is appropriate, and not to distribute and have discussion at that meeting. So.
Well, and maybe that's to our benefit, where we get feedback and we can create something that is.
Modify or
Yeah,
whatever is.
and then
yeah.
create the,
Is this still a working document though, or is this the document?
I mean, I think it's a working document.
Okay.
That was part of my question about the commentary part,
yeah.
Right.
So, I think a
Maybe
number
that's
of
the goal,
these
work with that.
that have been, these outlines that have been produced will be working documents. But at least it's a start. And so is there any opposition for her to hand this to him and begin our coordination efforts. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Perfect, so we have approved to do that. So we are going to move on to action item B, and that is the creation, to recommend a town resiliency fund, although there is such a fund, is that right, Gary?
There is not a resiliency fund.
There is
There is a rainy day fund.
Okay.
Which I believe is a different purpose than the resiliency fund.
What is its purpose?
You'd need a lot of rain to,
To be
It's,
resilient?
it is intended to protect the town from economic shocks. If revenues fall short, if expenditures get out of line, there's money there that's available to keep the town running.
And is that the amount of 7.4 million?
No, the rainy day fund it's 6 months of operating revenues, so it's more like 2.5 million, I believe.
So it's not specific to,
It's not specific to climate change or
Right,
or
so,
to,
okay,
you
that
know,
would be-
disaster recovery, anything like
Yeah.
that.
So how much is our beach fund for oceanic beach and dune renourishment?
about 6.4 million currently.
I think that's right, yeah.
Okay, so the 6.4 million of that fund is not included in the 7.4 million of non-restricted?
Yeah, let me run you through the whole outline here if I can.
Please.
Do it from a top-down standpoint. And Sally, please jump in as I go through. Sally and I contributed this as well in trying to just frame the need for establishing a resiliency fund. I think that's clear. And the reasons are evident. We've talked about them. They can be used for a number of things, including responding to, storm damage, significant storm damage, start to sock away the money really that we need for the larger projects, whether we can fund them ourselves or we are, doing, our part of a larger, a contribution to a grant, a matching funds kind of setup. And the kind of scope and the amounts we're talking about far exceed. I just put the 7.4 million in to highlight the town has done quite well over these last several years in running a surplus and built up that fund. As recently, I think as 3 or 4 years ago, it was less than half of that. So we've built up a pretty good bankroll for the town in a general fund purpose. But 7.4 million wouldn't go very far in dealing with sea level rise and all the factors that we know will come about with that kind of scope. So, you can capitalize town projects with a fund of that nature. You can strengthen the emergency response. You can hire the necessary resources to help develop not only the studies, but the grant applications for the larger projects and the matching funds that go along with that. Finally, it can be capitalized in several ways. We had talked years ago in budget and finance about a couple of specific ways that you could begin to build a significant reserve for the town. We weren't talking about resilience at the time, but we were talking about having more in the overall reserves than we did at the time. We could create, like the beach tax, a separate restricted fund, and that would have to go through referendum and through Dover and the legislature in order to enact that, but it is possible to do. And or we could do something as maybe an easier starting point to do a set aside, and Gary's very well versed on the whole town set asides that come out of our operating surplus each year now, infrastructure being a big one. We could do something like that and segmenting a portion of the town's net proceeds into a to be developed resiliency fund, just as they do with the infrastructure fund now. So that's what we put out in terms of just an overall primer on the whole notion of a resiliency fund. And, I think it's important that the town give this serious consideration. There's lots more detail to be defined, but this is a starting point.
So I want to reference the outline of bullet points that that subcommittee produced, and thank you all for doing that, which was also circulated. I guess what I'd like to hear is, you've done a lot of outlining and sharing of information, a lot of background work. Where do we go with this, with the committee forward?
I think this would be recommended to the town council for further discussion and consideration.
So what I'm hearing is, with this outline in its current state, you are seeking a vote of our committee that we make this recommendation now. Is that correct?
Or with modifications if need be. I think we just need to get the dialogue really moving, and the next step is to move it to town council for their consideration. So if we think as a committee that this is a good enough starting point just to prime the pump, so to speak, no pun intended, that would be a good outcome here.
So thank you. Let's have discussion on that.
Yeah, so the 7.4 million here does include the rainy day fund,
Yes,
but it does not include any part of the 6.4 million of the beach fund.
right. That's the definition of non-restricted funds, is
Okay.
these are the funds that are available for the town to utilize as it sees fit.
Okay.
So is the question for the town council, how much we put aside? Are we getting them to buy into the idea that we need it, or?
Yeah, buy into the idea that it's a needed thing and then have further discussion. Ultimately, we'll have to develop the sources of revenue to go into it. I don't know that you need to develop a target amount, just that, we need to have significant contributions over time.
And it's worth noting too, that right now we have $7.4 million in unrestricted funds. Who knows what we'll have next year, whether or not that number's gonna increase. I mean, there's really no way of predicting how the town's gonna do from year to year. I mean, right now, after the pandemic, it's not surprising that the town would have been doing a lot better, given, Dewey's, I think, really enjoyed a lot of tourism, and
Yeah.
real estate prices have increased, and rental
And that might
income
not-
is, yeah.
So, but, I imagine it being just a percentage of something, like, let's stock away, let's tithe, let's put 10% or something, but that's the town council.
So I'm hearing, first off, that generally, and we'll take a vote, of course, there's consensus that we should recommend to the town council. It will be for the town council to determine what the sources of funding would be, which Dave has mentioned, may be taking, and I think that you said something too, Kelly, about taking a percentage of maybe the rainy day fund, or the one I know that will frighten a lot of people is, should there be another tax? And
Right, and let's call it a
nobody's-
fund, not a tax.
Yes, an assessment, I don't know if that softens it, but that would be for the town council to figure out. So the framework of getting that discussion before the town council and using this outline to share with them so that the town council can discuss it and ultimately make a vote on, number one, can we establish this? And then number two, how does it get funded? We would be voting just to make the recommendation so that that discussion can occur. And so what I'd like to know is if there's more discussion that we want to have, or whether we want to take a vote at this time on making that recommendation.
I just want to add, or throw this out there, just that we snuck long-term plan and within this, and, obviously that's its own big picture funding, whatever, and is that where this belongs?
So-
And do we point that out, like, or is, 2 years from now when we want, $500,000 for a study? I don't know, I just want to,
Yes, in all likelihood, that would fall into the resiliency fund scope.
Yeah.
Because it would be targeted for things that help deal with, storm management and climate change.
So I guess that would be part of what the town council is going to need to determine and vote upon how the funds would get spent and for what needs. And of course, we don't know when we're gonna have the next emergency. Is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be 6 years?
Right.
So what's long-term, what's short-term?
Right, and that's outside. So as a member of the long-term subcommittee, I want, this not to get lost in the shuffle.
So how would you
I think this is
suggest?
fine. I just want to point it out, right? I mean, what do you guys think?
Gary, do you
Well, I'm a little concerned about focusing too much on the $7.4 million. The only restricted funds, and this is in accounting terminology, and I'm looking at the town's financial statements, the only restricted funds is the beach fund. That's $6.3 million. Everything else is technically unrestricted, but they are assigned or committed for certain uses. I mean, the $7.4 million includes the rainy day fund, which is 2.7. It also includes the town hall fund, which is 3.2. The streets and infrastructure, which is 245. So there are some other things that it's assigned to. It's certainly a discussion that needs to be had. I think the mayor and I have a disagreement about the use of the funds from the rainy day fund. I believe it's much more intended for and should be reserved for economic shocks that the town may suffer in the future, and that there should be, I believe again, that there should be a separate resiliency fund, and the question of how you fund that is certainly open at this point. We are trying to marshal as many resources as possible to build the new town hall, and we're actually doing a pretty good job. We were able to move almost $1 million out of the funds from last year because we were fully funded and we had about almost $1 million of surplus that could be put there. Once the town hall funding is set and we're moving forward, I think there will be some other possibilities. The hotel tax that we have right now, we're devoting half of that to the building of the new town hall. That at some point within the next couple of years, I would hope can be rededicated to something else. Could be the resiliency fund. So
Gary, this was only really a snapshot as to what the general number is that we would have today available, and to show that while that sounds like a healthy amount, and it is, it's certainly not going to solve this problem for us. I felt the need to put something in there in terms of what amount we have today. So I don't really put much emphasis on that number, except in the overall comparison to what we will probably need to solve these problems.
yeah, I mean, it's a big issue. It's a big funding issue. I would expect at some point that a resiliency fund might actually get melded together with the streets and infrastructure fund because there's a lot of commonality there. Anyway, I just wanted to focus a little bit on the numbers there. Just
Are you
so that
suggesting we
clear.
just take out that actual number, or?
It's fine for discussion purposes at this point. We can talk about it at the town council level. It's really up to Dave if he feels the need to continue.
I don't see any need to remove it, but I think it just gives us a milepost of, what the current reserves are that could be used for anything of this nature. And the point being that it's not sufficient for the, what we will need to accomplish. That's all.
So, is there any more comment about whether including the 7.4 language should or shouldn't be in there for purposes just of making a statement of what the concerns and factual situation is?
3 ideas on that. I've become convinced that in these climate change discussions, it is useful to try to distinguish between short-term, what needs to be done now, intermediate term, and long-term, and to try to come to some concept. Sure, there's going to be overlap, but I think those are valid constructs, particularly the short-term, which will be part of my third thing. The second thing is, it seems like there's a whipsaw back and forth. Should we have a fund? Well, how much would we reckon as to what would be in it? Well, what are the components of it going to be? what is it for? Is it in water infrastructure? Is it other thing? So you get into that. What are we doing? What will it include? What will it not include? That touches back on, well, are we talking about now, intermediate, or long term? And then the third point is that tucked away in all of this, what I discovered at the Fenwick Island meeting was the magic void. And I haven't heard that so far, although it comes very close in the fourth bullet point, where it says, serving as a source of matching funds for grants obtained both independently and in partnership with other nearby coastal towns for larger joint projects. So what would be the relationship of the resiliency fund to that concept?
Can I respond to all three of your issues, Dave?
I'm sorry, I
Please,
couldn't.
Dave,
I'm going to respond to all three of your issues.
please.
The first is the short, medium, and long-term issue. If you recall, and I know you attended at least several of last year's meetings of the committee, we focused on trying to come up with policy-related things that could be accomplished in the short term, understanding that we're dealing with something that is big and complex. And we felt the need to try to accomplish that, and we did. And so as recently as 2 meetings ago, when we finally ratified the meeting minutes from the September 23 last meeting of that committee, we can now promote those to the town council and say, here were our recommendations. And they probably already begun to discuss them. They certainly have on the free board and such. So all of that will be taken in due course, and we have been focused on the near-term objectives. Also, the whole notion of how to go about this is, it's a big problem. We're all just trying to grapple with the many facets of it. But I think it starts with promoting the notion of, should we have a resiliency fund? And that's all we're really trying to do here, is say, we believe the town needs a resiliency fund. Let's start some serious dialogue and involve various parts of the town management and council and so forth in how to best do that. And I think that's all this is intended to do at this moment.
I would agree, Dave, and while all of this information that's been put together can be the argument and basis to explain the position and the recommendation of the committee, if we vote to make that recommendation to the town, the only true issue is, should we make the recommendation to the town that they have a resiliency fund so that that discussion begins? And so with that in mind, are we ready to take a vote as to whether we want to make that recommendation? Yes, Dave.
I agree with what you said, David, in terms of policy, and should we have the fund? I believe that we should. I believe that it's good policy, and that I believe that there's an unidentified immediate benefit. And it's the magic void. So I'll give it to you.
All right, are we ready?
Grant-worthy.
Are we
If
ready?
we have a resiliency fund, yes or no, our ability to get a brick grant is enhanced. Other grants are enhanced. That we are the kind of municipality who gets it.
So are we ready to vote?
Can we
Yeah.
vote on, okay, so all in favor of making the recommendation to the town that there be a Dewey Beach Resiliency Fund? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? So that is now voted and approved that that recommendation will be made to the town.
And notice that there, I've encircled long-term plan.
Well,
It's because there's a short, intermediate, and long-term
Well, I think,
dividend there.
yeah, and I think to be general, and I actually like using the number because I think we need to start talking about what these dollars are. So I think being general, but also putting the number there.
great. Let's move on to action item C, which is Sally, Dave, and Kelly. This is for real estate disclosure education for property owners. And of course, this is going to be somewhat limited in terms of what that means by not overlapping with the marketing committee. So which of you all would like to address that?
I'll start and Sally, please chime in. We didn't address it separately. We know that there has been discussion about the need for such a communication. We did include an item in the marketing discussion for that. And I think, let's start with engaging with the marketing committee on this front. And I think that will fall out as one of the subtasks for that, and is probably one of the earliest ones we'll be able to accomplish, because there's already been some work that I think has started on that front.
So what I'm hearing is that's part of what was already discussed with respect to the marketing meeting? and
That's the way I view it.
Though I do want to add, what I learned is that there's no federal requirement, but there is a state requirement from what I understand. And, one point to make is, do we want to be leaning to the side of oversharing, as my husband would say, or just meet that requirement, which is to say, when you're making a transaction, this house is in a flood zone. And that's the most minimal.
Can you discuss that a little bit in more
Well, what
depth?
I read briefly, I didn't, was that, Delaware gets a D rating in terms of disclosures for real estate. The ones that get higher ratings, they're required to say that my house is flooded, this is when it flooded, you're in a flood zone, and disclose all this information. We don't, as a state, require that. We just require to disclose. And we should double check this. This is my brief reading. We require that we disclose that if you're gonna buy the house, that it's in a flood zone. And most people know this through a mortgage, but somebody might buy a house that's not getting a mortgage, and so we would be required to say, you're in a flood zone.
And so how would that go about? What would we do from this
I
committee?
don't know, other communities do it, so I think the first thing to do is look there, but, do we disseminate a flyer to all real estate agents?
What's the advantage of doing so?
Well, there isn't really, that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying, do we
Just
want to
gives you
lean
better
on that?
rating,
Yeah,
but
we want to
who
meet
really
the
cares?
requirements, the minimum requirement. I do think we have some obligations.
Because when you file for insurance, they certainly let you
Right.
know that you're in a flood
I
zone.
was
Right.
just gonna say, that I think is gonna be what kind of,
That's the catch-all.
yeah, it is, because as time goes on and there are bigger floods, insurance companies, price of flood insurance has gone through the roof now. I think it's.
Well, and most people have to, through getting insurance, but also a mortgage companies who make you do it. So there's a
It's
small.
like either way,
Yeah.
you'll be informed.
But I do think we have some state obligation.
So how do we better explore that? And then
I
we
wonder-
could turn that over to the marketing committee to educate the public on that. Gary, do you know offhand what exactly?
I do not know what the requirements
I
are.
wonder
I
if
know
we just call any real estate agent, they might know.
Dawn's waving her hand.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Oh, Dawn?
Yes, Dawn, please.
Good morning, all.
she has all the answers.
Good morning, all. Would like for you folks to realize that on the town website, there are many of the ideas that you are promoting and discussing. They are found on the town website. Also, once a year, an actual physical mailing to the real estate agents, to the lending institutions, and to our town residents. Information about their property or the fact that we are in a special flood hazard area and flood zone. So this is done once a year, physically mailing at the town's expense, that is sent out. So the public then does have this mailing. Whether or not they read it, that's on them. And of course, whenever property owners or potential new owners, I think it would behoove them to ask the question, since they see the bay on one side and the ocean on the other, will my house flood? So a lot of this information certainly would be common sense on the part of the potential property owner. And then the current property owners are getting this mailing once a year.
So I
That's
guess
all.
the question becomes, thank you for sharing that, and I think that's consistent with some of the information you shared at the last meeting where you were explaining about these mailings that the town does. I guess the big question becomes whether we want as a committee to recommend a requirement that if somebody is selling their property, that disclosure be made before the sale. Because if somebody does not get a mortgage, then they're not going to have that unless they ask the right questions. And you usually get your insurance once you buy the property. So that's when you would learn that it's not going to get covered. Is it something that this committee thinks should happen or not?
Well, and more importantly, is it a state requirement? I know, I read that there are no federal requirements in that regard.
If I could speak to that, I did put together an email, and I forget where exactly within the committee and whatnot it was sent, but one of the questions was, what are we attempting to do beyond existing Delaware law? Now, as to federal law, the granddaddy there is lead paint disclosure. So there is a federal. I'm not sure if radon has been tacked on there or not. I'm just a retired guy at this point. But the two disclosures under Delaware law that now exist, one is in Title 25, Chapter 6, and that has resulted in a disclosure form with something like 150 questions, one of which is, do you have flood insurance? How much does it cost? What's the annual premium? And gets into, has the property flooded? And that's put out by the Delaware Real Estate Commission. And you get a little bit into that, well, isn't that a listed property? And what if you have family members that are, the father who's giving the daughter land, and there's not going to be a mortgage because it's paid for, there are exceptions. The other one is under Kiowa, and that gets into where you have a homeowners or a condominium. And there are real estate disclosures upon resale under 81-409. And they get into that same thing.
So are you saying that it already exists?
To a degree, however, our BCEGS grade is 8 and then there are, if you go online, there's another one where Delaware gets a low score.
So I think
The biggest obstacle, if I can continue, is that you put these disclosures out there, but the only consequence is that the person who's put down interest money, earnest money can back out and get it back. There is no consequence. I know that Ruth Kings Briggs filed a piece of legislation years ago to say that you open yourself up to punitive damages, and that died in committee. Some disclosures can have a criminal sanction because it's
So
criminal
it sounds
misconduct.
like-
This is a pretty big one, though.
Yes.
Given the world we're living in today, and especially in the case of Delaware, where, we're not just dealing with climate change, Delaware is basically sinking, so we're getting a double whammy.
Yeah, we have land subsidence. We're the Netherlands and Delaware of the United States, and Sussex County is the Netherlands of Delaware, and Dewey Beach is the Netherlands of Sussex County.
Okay, hold on here. Can
if
I add something? Okay, so on the town of Dewey Beach, under new property owner information, they have welcome, they have taxes, construction, renovations, running your property, elections and voting, trash collection, and guess what? They have weather and flooding. They have flood information page, they have a hurricane safety information page, they have a building official all linked in the website.
This is where?
On the town of Dewey Beach.
Right.
So we are communicating to new property owners, whether or not it's been handed to you, or you bought it, or you're mortgaging it, it is communicated.
It is there. So it sounds like that issue is effectively resolved because
Why?
it's there.
It's there if you're willing to look at it.
And
Well,
so,
that's the question though,
Well-
whether or not that's gonna fly.
Well, that's the thing, when we start sending out these campaigns, we need to tell people,
Look at,
this is where, if and when you need this information, this is where you find it.
so what I'm hearing are two things. The first is whether or not Delaware has as a requirement for that disclosure. And if it doesn't, whether our committee wants Dewey Beach to make that disclosure, which it appears it's already doing. But would we want that as a mandate? That's what I'm hearing.
and I would put out, do we want to, I would suggest that we meet the bare minimum requirement and we don't need to do more.
So I think the first question needs to be, does Delaware already require this? And so that should be something that somebody could research online. Is there somebody that wants to do that?
I'll do it.
Great, thank you. And you'll bring that back to our?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so that would address that issue. And that brings us to Gary and Dave with respect to the creation of an ordinance regarding storm reconstruction. I circulated a bunch of information that Gary had sent to me, and that was also published online. Which of you two gentlemen wants to address it?
Do you have a hard copy of that I can have?
Of this whole thing?
Yeah.
I do not, I only have my copy. I circulated it, but I don't have an extra copy of that material.
Okay.
Harry, I don't have much to contribute on this one. I didn't really have the bandwidth to do much on it in the preparation. Do you want to just I know that Dawn probably has a lot of this information already available on the town website, but what do you think so far, Gary?
Well, I think there's not a lot that needs to be discussed right now. I mean, Dave Thomas and I both started to research this, and part of a little bit of confusion for me, we talked about a storm reconstruction ordinance, but then in another part of the University of Delaware materials, they talked about a storm recovery ordinance. And it seems there's somewhat of a distinction between the two, as I found when I started looking at this. The storm recovery ordinance, gives legal authority kind of overall for getting the process of recovery going. You can develop a framework for how that recovery process should play out. But then there's also a reconstruction ordinance, which kind of not only establishes legal authority, but kind of gives you a protocol and a prioritization system for how reconstruction should take place. And should there be certain residential areas or business areas that take priority in terms of reconstruction and permitting over others. The thing that also included here, and I'm looking just at the summary that was put together, we found a model recovery ordinance that was put forward by the American Planning Association. And just like any other model ordinance, you can use that and use pieces of it and plug it in for your own use. In terms of a specific storm reconstruction ordinance, we found one for Nags Head, North Carolina, which I think is instructive. And I've included in the summary just a excerpt from the preamble for both of those ordinances. I think it's useful. I think the task right now is for us to figure out what Dewey Beach really needs. Nags Head, North Carolina is probably, at least in terms of year-round population, is probably 5 or 6 times as big as Dewey Beach. Dewey Beach, I think, in square mileage is much smaller than Nags Head, North Carolina. So the question is, do we really need a storm reconstruction ordinance, or what does Dewey Beach really need? The other thing we need to take a look at, and this came up as there was a note in the latest town newsletter, which I always recommend for everyone to read. Always has useful information. The town manager noted that Dawn Hinks, our building official, had been working diligently to make us a full participant in the Sussex County Hazard Mitigation Plan. So we need to delve into that to see how much of what we might do in a storm reconstruction ordinance or a recovery ordinance is already covered by our participation in the hazard mitigation plan. So those are open questions at this point. There's more work that has to be done. I think, an email that Dave sent to me just in the last day or so, we talked about delving more deeply into the Sussex County Hazard Mitigation Plan. It could be that much of what's in that plan already covers what we would need to include in a reconstruction ordinance. And, again, it's what's appropriate for Dewey Beach, and if it's appropriate, what should it include? Those are kind of open questions still at this point.
And how can this committee take, to determine whether or not there's already coverage?
Well, we have a subgroup. Dave and I are a subgroup. I think we need to do some more work on this.
So that's what I was.
Come back to the committee with some other information and recommendations.
That's what I wanted to make sure I heard, is that you two have started the work and you're willing to continue and bring
I
back.
committed Dave even without his hand.
Well, and what do we mean by ordinance? Like,
A formal ordinance that would become part of the town code.
If I can, when the town manager mentioned SHAMP, I went and looked it up, and I see that one of the things for Dewey is a disaster recovery plan. And then there are other plans, but in terms of the family of planning, is a ordinance or set of regulations or plan. All of that gets back to the question of, as George Sanford would say, Martha, I think this is the big one. What happens after we really get hit? And it's sobering to read about what Nags Head has done, because the triggering event is a Category 4 storm. The other thing that's sobering is to read the erosion studies as to what they need to defend themselves. And that's something that Sussex County so far in Delaware has avoided. I mentioned that at the Estuarian Center, and it got some laughs. No, we don't have an erosion problem here in Dewey Beach. No, we do gangbusters. And the breaches down by the Cullen Bridge illustrate that. And it's an older ordinance at Nags Head. It goes back to 1990. That's back in the era where Dewberry and Davis had come up with the concept of a 540 cross-section for dune to defend against a Category 3 hurricane. We know that that's outdated. I was interested that DENREC did compute for us that our 13.2 foot dune out there is about 23% of the dune.
I'm going to run out of time here in a few minutes.
Yeah. Why don't we,
And so that's the sobering part of it. If you look back at the setbacks and the 6 foot requirement, you get into some interesting stuff. So there's an educative focus there as to where are we, where do we stand in these things. I was very gratified to see Senator Hocker's letters recently about erosion needs to be taken seriously.
okay, so let's go back to the ordinance issue. So let me first make sure that I have it correct. Gary, were you working with Dave Davis or Dave Thomas?
Thomas.
Okay, so I have the wrong Dave
yeah,
here,
I did
and I
notice that, yeah.
apologize.
Yeah.
So
Boy, do I feel better.
You're off the hook.
So
he was willing to.
what I'm hearing is that the two of you are going to continue to work on this
Yes.
and bring back to our next meeting the information that you learned.
Yes, I believe bottom line is we are expected to have some kind of thinking, planning, recommendation, and, as to what that results in, particularly in the way of law, ordinance, regulation, remains to be seen, but
I wanted to comment.
I'm sorry?
Dawn wants to comment.
Yes, please. Thanks, Steve. Dawn?
Thank you. Currently, in our floodplain code, which is section 1 in our current Town of Dewey Beach code, we have it so that and in relating to this subject, any reconstruction, rehabilitation must be requiring a town application for a building permit. The town floodplain manager designee must be involved in it. It is not something that the property owners can arbitrarily just do on their own without town involvement and also FEMA floodplain involvement. Now, on this particular subject with the Nags Head code, I've read it in brief. It does have a different kind of requirement that after a major storm, there's certain kinds of moratoriums on building and reconstruction. And so that moratorium, I have not been able to find within our building code. However, right now, with or without a major storm, if there's any kind of damage called substantial damage, the property owners are required to follow the current town code, which is found in section 101.
And that's really the question. Do we need something like a moratorium or some other prioritization system to kind of guide the reconstruction process?
Can we define
Goes without saying,
moratorium?
you have to have a permit. We have to have a permit now.
Can you define moratorium, please?
Well, just a prohibition, I guess, on building. Or
It's
it
a
could be
pause
temporary,
to figure out where you
to
are.
stop, yeah.
So if I have a home and I get damaged from flooding or hurricane or some really detrimental storm, you're saying there's a pause on having me have a permit?
Yep,
So that I can
that's the
immediately
first thing
direct.
typically you want to do is get back to where you were before the
Okay.
storm.
Okay, I just wanted to understand.
Yes,
I
and
mean,
that's one of the vexing aspects of it.
You have to have a permit now for anything you want
For
to do.
any
Right.
kind
So,
of changes
yeah,
anyway,
right.
so
That's right.
But they might make you, as an example, build a code where you weren't before.
Yeah, which gets
You certainly
into
would have to if
the
it's
50%
FEMA
50% rule.
So you couldn't just go back.
And how the model code
Right.
that you have online and the Nags Head proposal really puts that on steroids.
Right.
If you have 10% damage, which is not substantial damage, it's a lesser damage, I don't have a copy of it in front of me. But under the definitional part, if you hit 10%, then you have to do what is now a version of the FEMA 50% rule. Not only do you have to elevate the building to the base flood standard, but you have to bring it up to other codes. And then you get into, well, what is that family of other
We're
codes?
in a rabbit hole, folks.
Right, yeah.
In these,
Yeah.
in this,
We need to make that determination.
Okay, so you
right,
guys,
the other thing that is very important is that in both of those codes, if you hit substantial damage, 50%, the structure is declared to be destroyed.
Yep.
And you can expect to have a notice of condemnation followed by a writ from the sheriff to raise.
So basically, for purposes of our committee.
That's draconic.
The focus is going to be whether the existing ordinances are sufficient or to cover these issues, or whether this committee wants to make a recommendation for another ordinance or a modification to existing ordinances that would address a more catastrophic situation in the rebuilding.
Right.
So I'm hearing that Gary and Dave will come back next meeting with their further research into that.
Yes.
So I am not seeing any members of the public present or online. Do any of our committee members have further comments about the issues that we've addressed or new action items that you want to be addressed at the next meeting?
I just have one question, and I hope it's a yes or no answer. In discussing Freeboard and marketing, raising the Freeboard, Does that if we say we need to raise 3 feet, does that mean our 35-foot max is 38 now?
In the flood zone, there's no 35-foot height limit. The height is relative to base flood elevation plus freeboard. So
So plus-
if the base flood elevation is 5 feet, freeboard currently right now is 1 foot. You have to start at 6, and then you can build 32 feet from there.
Okay.
And so that automatically adjusts no matter what the
Yeah,
freeboard
that's
is.
Okay. Any other comments from our committee members? May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? We are hereby adjourned.
Thank
you all.
you.